We will discuss the development of the diaphragm. Diaphragm is a dome-shaped musculotendinous partition present between thoracic and abdominal cavities. It consists of central tendon and two crura. Now, the pleural and pericardial cavities, they lie just above the diaphragm, and peritoneal cavities, they lie below it. Now, diaphragm is a composite structure developing from four embryonic components, that is septum transversum, then pleuroperitoneal membranes. Number 3 is dorsal and ventral mesenteries of esophagus, but the more contribution is from the dorsal one. Then mesoderm of the lateral body wall. Now this septum transversum is going to form the central tendon of the diaphragm. Pleuroperitoneal membranes, they contribute to the small dorsal peripheral part of it. And dorsal mesentery of esophagus and part of ventral mesentery, they are going to form the crura of diaphragm. And mesoderm of lateral body wall, they contribute to the large peripheral part of this structure. Now coming to the development in detail, the anteromedian portion including the central tendon and vena cava and esophageal opening, they are developing from septum transversum, which is a mesodermal sheath lying caudal to the pericardial sac. Now it extends from the ventral body wall to the esophageal segment of the foregut. Now initially this dorsal part remains free and forms the anterior boundary. This portion is going to free, so it forms the anterior boundary. Now, so this is the lateral view, and this is a transverse section showing the different cavities. We can see here the peritoneal cavity, then pericardial cavity, pericardio-peritoneal canal. This is septum transversum. Now in this case, if we see in the transverse section, so this is the primitive foregut. On either side of this there is pericardio-peritoneal canal, and here the development of the heart, which is enclosed in the pericardial cavity, is shown in this diagram. Now the pleuroperitoneal membranes. So right and left pleuroperitoneal membranes, they separate the pleural cavities which are lying above the diaphragm from the peritoneal cavity which is lying below it. They forms a small dorsal peripheral part. You can see these openings here. So they are present dorsally and little bit laterally. So small dorsolateral portion is there. They closes the pleuroperitoneal canals. We have seen two canals on either side of the foregut. So these canals are just closed by these membranes. They fuse the dorsal mesentery of the esophagus and septum transversum anteriorly. The contribution by the pleuroperitoneal membrane, initially it is quite large, but with the advancement in the development of during the fetal life, it is reduced in size. Now between esophagus and aortic opening, the dorsal mesentery of the esophagus, it contributes. I told you the dorsal mesentery contribution is more in comparison to the ventral one. Now coming to this is a diagram showing pleuroperitoneal opening, which is later on closed by the pleuroperitoneal membrane. Then there is the dorsal mesentery of the esophagus is shown. Then this is the anterior portion, which is majority of it is contributed by the septum transversum, that is central tendon. So central tendon of the diaphragm is formed by this septum transversum. Now the fourth component is the mesoderm of the body wall, which contribute to the development of the diaphragm. That is, it contribute to the peripheral portion of it. The developing pleural cavity, that is pleuroperitoneal cavity, you can see it burrows into the lateral body wall and split the wall into two portions. So one portion is just known as the external layer and another one is the internal layer. The external layer, it forms the definitive body wall. So this is the definitive body wall, and internal layer, it forms a peripheral portion of the diaphragm external to the part which is derived from the pleuroperitoneal membrane. So this is the central portion which is derived from septum transversum. Then come dorsolaterally, there is the pleuroperitoneal canals which are closed by the pleuroperitoneal membrane. Then more laterally, if we see, then it is the contribution from the mesoderm of the body wall. Now this is again diagram showing in different sections. You can see septum transversum, then pericardial cavity. These are the pleural cavities. Later on, these pleural cavities are separated from the peritoneal cavity by the appearance of this membrane, which is known as pleuroperitoneal membrane. And so peritoneal cavity, pericardial and pleural cavity, they are separated from each other by the formation of the membranes. So in the upper portion of the diaphragm, These two cavities are separated by the different components, or these are the embryological components which are going to form the diaphragm to separate these two important cavities from this important cavity, that is peritoneal cavity. Now, keeping in mind the development of the diaphragm, the nerve supply of the diaphragm can be better understood how, that is, during fourth week of intrauterine life, the septum transversum lies in the cervical region, that is opposite to the third, fourth, and fifth cervical somites. Now, definitely they will be supplied by C3, C4, C5 nerve. So that is phrenic nerve components are there. So later on, what is happening? The phrenic nerve reaches the diaphragm through the pleuroperitoneal folds. During sixth week of intrauterine life, the diaphragm descends to its definitive position. So what is the definitive position of the diaphragm? That is thoraco-abdominal junction, opposite to which segment, level of which segment? That is T7 to T12 spinal segments. So initially it was lying at the C3, C4, C5 level, but as the descent of the diaphragm is happening, so it is coming and lying to this position, that is T7 to T12 spinal segments. Now the descent of the diaphragm, why it happens? It is because of the elongation of the neck, then descent of the heart is there, then is expansion of the pleural cavity is there, then during descent it carries its nerve supply, that is phrenic nerve, along with it. Now the so diaphragm is supplied by the phrenic nerve. Since the peripheral part of the diaphragm it develops from the lateral body wall, so it receives the sensory supply from the lateral intercostal nerves. So this is a diagram. Basically, as I have always told you in my previous lectures also, that all the diagrams, they are taken from your standard textbook. So just to make you more clear, so this is the diagram in which the complete diaphragm is formed. That is a contribution from the pleuroperitoneal membrane, then dorsal mesentery of the esophagus and ventral mesentery of esophagus is contributing to this portion, and this portion, that is portion of central tendon, is formed by the septum transversum, and a large peripheral part is contributed by the body wall, so lateral body wall. So this is all about the development of the diaphragm. So again the section showing that septum transversum forming central tendon, pleural cavities, pleuroperitoneal openings are there. So later on they fuse and a membrane it just appear which separate these cavities from each other. Now coming to the applied aspect, keeping in mind because the diaphragm is developing from the different embryological component, so if any arrest is happening in the development of any particular component, definitely it lead on to the pathology. So diaphragmatic hernia is herniation of the abdominal content into the thoracic cavity due to failure of proper formation of the diaphragm. So one of them is the congenital diaphragmatic hernia. These are four types of congenital diaphragmatic hernia. They are present, that is Bok-Delic hernia, then congenital hiatus hernia, then anterior Morgagni hernia, and diaphragmatic eventration. You can see, as I have told you, the central tendon is developing from where? That is septum transversum. Then pleuroperitoneal membrane, they are going to present on this side, they are going to form the Bok-Delic hernia. So this is the foramen of Morgagni. So that we will discuss in a next slides. I will tell you. So these are the different sites of these different congenital diaphragmatic hernia. Now coming to the Bok-Delic hernia, it is the defect called foramen Bok-Delic occurs due to the defective development of the pleuroperitoneal membrane or failure of fusion of pleuroperitoneal membrane with other elements of the diaphragm. So the diaphragm, the muscles that separates the chest from the abdomen, fails to close during prenatal development. You can see in the diagram. So this is happening in the on the posterolateral side, that is, this is foramen of Bok-Delic. It is seen in 1 in 2500 to 3000 births. So it is most common on left side. Why? Because right pleuroperitoneal canal, it closes earlier than the left one. You can see here, this is foramen of Bok-Delic, from where the hernia can occur. In this diagram you can see here. Now coming to next to this, that is the herniation of the abdominal content. because it is more common on left side, as I have told you. So herniation of what content, what are the structures lying on left side? Mainly stomach, intestine, and sometimes liver too. So this portion is of liver into the thorax. They compress the developing lung, and the lungs will be smaller than expected. So pulmonary hypoplasia, it happens. It will have less, the fetus will have less developed blood vessels. This causes high blood pressure in the lungs, so leading on to the pulmonary hypertension. So these are the pathologies which can happen once the Bactella hernia is happening from the pleuroperitoneal canals. So this is about the, you can see here. So next is left-sided congenital diaphragmatic hernia. It is seen in, again we can say that this CDH is seen in 83% of babies with that is on the left side of the diaphragm. Left-sided CDH allows for the possibility of the stomach, intestine, and sometimes the liver to move up into the baby's chest. Now, if we see the Bactella hernia on right side, that is 17% of babies with CDH have a defect on the right side of the diaphragm. Now, right-sided CDH almost always allows the liver to move into the chest, because if the left-sided Bactella hernia is happening, so there are less chances of movement of the liver to that side, but the majority of the chances are of stomach and intestine. But if it is on the right side, the liver, it moves towards the thoracic cavity. So the incidence of the right-sided Bactella hernia is less, that is 17%, and it is more on the left side. Now coming to the next pathology, that is congenital hiatus hernia. It is the herniation of the part of fetal stomach through an excessively large opening of esophagus. Now, this congenital hiatus hernia is uncommon, but congenitally large esophageal hiatus may be predisposing factor for acquired hiatal hernia. So this may be, this is in the center, you can see. So this, the dorsal and ventral mesentery of the esophagus is contributing to this portion. So if any defect is there, that is leading on to this congenital hiatus hernia. So these are the different sides of this, that is posterolateral side, central hernia, then retrosternal hernia. This is the posterior where the defect can happen. Now anterior Morgagni hernia or retrosternal hernia, there is a large gap in the sternocostal part of the diaphragm between sternal and costal slips of the diaphragm, called as foramen of Morgagni. So this is the foramen of Morgagni, through which the herniation can happen. The intestines may herniate into the pericardial cavity, or conversely the part of the heart may herniate into the epigastric region. In both ways the movement of the organ can happen. Now coming to the fourth congenital pathology of the diaphragm, that is eventration of the diaphragm. The musculature in one half of the diaphragm, it remains thin. It is not absent, but it remains thin and membranous, and hence ballooning is happening. So hence it just balloon out in the thorax, forming a diaphragmatic pouch. So upward displacement of the abdominal viscera occur. Then anomaly occur when muscular tissue does not develop in pleuroperitoneal membrane. Membrane is there, but muscular component is deficient. So it is not a complete communication. It is more common on left side, similar to the congenital diaphragmatic hernia, because there is superior displacement of the abdominal viscera into the pocket-like pouch, you can see. But this is not a true diaphragmatic hernia. Why? Because it is only the weakness of the wall. It is not the absence of the wall. So the partition is there, but that is membranous. It does not have muscular tissue. So that portion is known as eventration of diaphragm. So this is all about the development of the diaphragm. Thank you very much.